Now he's got Hunter Biden running the White House senior staff meetings. He said he wanted to do something for the middle class.
For Hunter Biden's not running the White
That's
House.
crazy,
Come on.
Scott.
I'm sorry. I'm just reading the journalism. I'm pro-journalist here. I'm reading the journalism about Hunter Biden running the ship here.
Scott Jennings, who is like the only non-left-wing Democrat they allow on the air. And boy, I don't know what they were thinking, because this guy has been a powerhouse recently. He has so come into his own. And you know that when CNN picks a Republican to come on the air, they try to pick a patsy, right? Because they want a one-sided conversation, but they got to have a fig leaf. You know, they got to say, well, we let the other side talk, right? So here he was on a panel. It's typical, 3-on-1, including a sitting Congresswoman, Debbie Dingell, the host of the panel, Dana Bash, and Scott Jennings. Well, take a look and see how he holds his own. It's a great clip.
But I got to say this. We got to stop talking about this. We spent a whole week. Republicans are having a great time. I mean, we need to get back to talking about Donald Trump and his performance and all the issues that are at stake and the contrast. This has been.
I agree.
How can
we stop talking about it? It's only the commander-in-chief of the United States we're talking about. He's not just a candidate.
Which is why we need to be talking about Donald Trump and all the things that he's done and how he wants to be a dictator and how he wants to thinks Roe versus Wade is the greatest thing that he ever did. How he wants to give your billionaire tax friends a tax cut. And thinks January 6th was a great thing.
You give me too much credit. I wish I had some billionaire friends. You got colleagues, public and private, who want Joe Biden to step down. You've got a lot of colleagues in your conference who want him to get out of the way. And what they're really saying is, we don't have confidence in him to lead for the next 4 years, which really means they don't have confidence in him to lead today. This is not a campaign problem. This is a White House problem. There are real questions about whether he's acting independently. He said, by the way, in his interview with Stephanopoulos the other night, he wanted to do 3 things: restore decency. Now he's got Hunter Biden running the White House senior staff meetings. He said he wanted to do something for the middle class.
For Hunter Biden's not running the White House.
That's crazy, Scott.
I'm sorry. I'm just reading the journalism. I'm pro-journalist here. I'm reading the journalism about Hunter Biden running the ship here. He said he wanted to help the middle class. They're being ravaged by record inflation. And he said he wanted to unite the country, and he is the most divisive, unpopular president in the modern era. He has failed by his own standards, and now his own party is petrified that you're headed for a historic wipeout in the fall. Now, I think they're dug in like Alabama ticks. I don't think this family's going anywhere, even as Democrats want him to get out of the way, because they know what's coming.
Let me bring Shermichael in here. I know you.
He's dug in like Alabama ticks. I love that. He's from Kentucky too, but he threw a little bit down to Alabama. Did you notice Dana Bash there? Having to come in and do damage control because the other 2 Democrats on the panel aren't good enough to go after Jennings. So then the moderator, Dana Bash, has to jump into Hunter Biden's not running meetings in the White House. Now, there are actual reports that Hunter Biden is sitting in on meetings in the White House, and things are being cleared through Hunter Biden right now. That would be convicted felon, admitted crackhead Hunter Biden. He's in the White House right now, and he is participating as a senior advisor to the president. Jennings was absolutely correct there. And let's reflect on some of the things that Scott Jennings was just commenting on in such a brilliant fashion. A little bit of a reflection on that disaster of an interview with George Stephanopoulos. Again, just like the interview with Mika and Joe this morning, this was supposed to fix things. This is supposed to make everything better. Here's Joe Biden fixing things.
Part of it is what I said when I ran was I want to do 3 things: restore some decency to the office, restore some support for the middle class instead of trickle-down economics, go from the middle out and the bottom up, the way the wealthy still do fine, everyone does better, and unite the country.
But what has all that work over?
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute, because George's response obviously should have been, well, if those are the 3 things you tried to do, you failed miserably. Decency back to the White House? You mean with the transgender topless dude running around with his bare boobs flopping around everywhere? And a packet of cocaine found right outside the Situation Room, and your son Hunter, a convicted felon, now participating in White House meetings? Is that how you're restoring decency to the White House, dude? How about your Deputy Secretary of Energy, the transgender bald dude who stole women's clothing from a suitcase? Can I go on and on here? Yes, I can. Decency to the White House? Something but indecency in the White House right now. There's no class there. Bring the people together and unite our broken nation. Give me a break. He's more divisive than anybody else. So instead, but that's exactly what, by the way, Scott Jennings was referring to. And he has been a miserable failure. George Stephanopoulos' response to all of that, though, this is what George's response is.
For the last 3.5 years cost you physically, mentally, emotionally?
Well, I just think it cost me a really bad night, bad run.
George, I know you've been so courageous and such a absolute champion for our country, but what does it cost you? Are you serious? Like I said, George Stephanopoulos' job is to do damage control for Democrats. That's not the appropriate question to ask. Here's a little bit more from that interview.
Let's start with the debate. You and your team have said you had a bad night, but your friend Nancy Pelosi actually framed the question that I think is on the minds of millions of Americans. Was this a bad episode or the sign of a more serious condition?
It's a bad episode. No indication of any serious condition. I was exhausted. I didn't listen to my instincts in terms of preparing, and I had a bad night.
You know, you say you were exhausted, and I know you've said that before as well, but you came, and you did have a tough month, but you came home from Europe about 11 or 12 days before the debate, spent 6 days in Camp David. Why wasn't that enough rest time, enough recovery time?
Because I was sick. I was feeling terrible. Matter of fact, the docs with me, I asked if they did a COVID test. We were trying to figure out what was wrong. They did a test to see whether or not I had some infection, a virus. I didn't. They just had a really bad cold.
Okay, real fast. There's a little bit more to this, but you notice how he keeps talking in past tense, that he had a cold. He felt really bad. He was sick. And of course, since then, this was taped, on Friday. So that would be July 5th. Since then, he's done many political appearances, the one infamous one at the Waffle House, but he went to a couple of campaign headquarters. He was in Wisconsin for a rally. He's hugging people. He's shaking hands. He's hugging everybody except that one little poor black girl who was hoping to get a hug, but he ignored the black woman and hugged all of the white people, the old white people, right? Because he's like, looks at the black girl. He's like, oh, I got your vote already. I can take you for granted. You're black. And then he moves on because that's who Joe Biden is. That's who he's always been. He's a Democrat. Anyway, this whole thing about, I was sick, but now I'm fine. That's why I'm sitting with you. That's why I'm hugging people on the rope line and giving them kisses and everything's fine, right? Do you hear his voice? See, they all told us he had a cold 45 minutes into the debate because everybody was commenting on how raspy and incomprehensible he was and how we couldn't understand what he was saying. And he had this sort of the really weak sounding voice with the Do you hear what we're getting from him here? What do you mean past tense? If that voice was a indication of your cold, what's going on with your voice right now? Unless the raspy voice is actually an indication of something else. It's an indication that he is a weak, feeble, debilitated old man who is losing the power of his lungs and vocal cords, or hear me out, just to be charitable, maybe it's not his physical state and his age that's doing it. Maybe it's the side effect of a very strong prescription medication that he's taking to mitigate whatever else is going on in his brain and in his body. Either way, we deserve to know, because we were told last time when he had the raspy voice, it was because he had a cold. And now he's got the exact same voice. This is the exact same Joe Biden we saw at the debate. There's no difference except they got better makeup on him and a better camera angle.
And did you ever watch the debate afterwards?
I don't think I did, no.
All right. I know I interrupt too much. But seriously, I don't think I did. This is 7 days after the debate. Did you watch the debate again? That's a yes or no question. Yes, I did. No, I didn't. I don't think I did. In other words, I can't remember. Joe Biden, The president of the United States in an interview trying to assure everybody that he's just fine and there's nothing wrong with his memory or his mental capacity, cannot remember for sure whether he watched a replay of a debate that he was in over the course of the last 7 days. I want you to think about that for a minute. Do you know anyone in your life who is of sound mind who would have to give the exact same answer? Anyone? Did you watch that? I don't think I did. Wouldn't you remember? It's broken. It's broken.
Well, what I want to get at is what were you experiencing as you were going through the debate? Did you know how badly it was going?
Yeah, look, the whole way I prepared, nobody's fault, mine. Nobody's fault but mine. I prepared what I usually would do, sitting down, as I did come back with foreign leaders or the National Security Council, for explicit detail. And I realized about partway through that, you know, although I get quoted, the New York Times had me down at 10 points before the debate, 9 now, or whatever the hell it is. The fact of the matter is that what I looked at is that he also lied 28 times. The way the debate ran, not my fault, nobody else's fault. No one else's fault.
But it seemed like you were having trouble from the first question in, even before he spoke.
Well, I just had a bad night.
All right, so that was a fascinating exchange, and again, another indication of George Stephanopoulos just there for damage control. I don't know why. Even people on, with my political proclivity has said, well, I got to hand it to George Stephanopoulos. He asked the tough questions. No, he did the bare minimum. He did less than the bare minimum. No follow-ups, no pushback, no challenges to Joe Biden on any of the objectionable things that he said or the lies or just the basic incoherence. But let's watch this last part together. Please tell me if I'm missing something here. The question from Stephanopoulos.
What I want to get at is what were you experiencing as you were going through the debate? Did you know how badly it was going?
So the question is, what were you experiencing while you were engaged in the debate? Now, unless you are medicated, heavily medicated, you should be able to answer that question. So let's see his answer, because I want to remember, this is what happens on these interviews. You lose sight of what the question is when Biden, mashed potato for brain, starts rambling incoherently about God knows what and bounces back and forth like a freaking ping pong ball on meth, right? The question is, did you realize while the debate was going on how badly you were doing? Here's the answer.
Yeah, look, the whole way I prepared, nobody's fault, mine.
Now, that's something that the staff told him to do. Don't make it look like you're blaming other people, because that looks weak, and that means you're passing the buck. This is all your responsibility. This also comes on the heels of press reports that Jill and Hunter were blaming his staff, so that did not go over well. So now he's trying to clean that mess up. Right.
Nobody's fault but mine. I prepared what I usually would do, sitting down, as I did come back with foreign leaders or the National Security Council, for explicit detail.
Does anyone follow what that meant? I prepared like I would for the National Security Council or a foreign leader with explicit detail, which I guess, what does that mean? You were over-prepared? And by the way, this is another thing that they kept doing in the interview. Every single time he was challenged on his capabilities or his ability to continue to be president or run on the ticket, all he does is talk about foreign affairs. Foreign affairs, NATO, Ukraine, Putin, China, Asia. And you notice one thing that he never does? He never, ever, ever says, well, I got to be here for the American people to help their way of life, to keep them freer, to figure out a way to get their economy. But he can't. First of all, he doesn't think of it because he doesn't care. He thinks that the job of being president is to fly off to Europe and hobnob with prime ministers. Okay, that's all he cares about. It's the trappings of the job, right? He doesn't realize that the job is right here at home. The job is protecting our borders instead of moving heaven and earth to do something about Ukraine's border. That's where his default position is constantly. NATO, China, Iran, whatever. And meanwhile, by the way, it's terrifying that that's his main focus, because the whole place has gone to hell in a handbasket since he got there. We had relative peace and security before he became president. So, as Barack Obama famously said, never underestimate Joe Biden's ability to things up. And that's exactly what he's done. All right. So again, the question on the table is, did you realize at the time what a bad night you were having?
And I realized about partway through that, I get quoted, the New York Times had me down at 10 points before the debate, 9 now, or whatever the hell it is.
Did you understand what that meant? I realized during the debate that the New York Times had me down 10 points before the debate, or 9 points. You see what's happening here, right? His brain is not functioning in a linear operative way. And at no point does George Stephanopoulos lean in and say, "Sir, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're talking about." Do you understand what he's talking about? I'm not following him.
The fact of the matter is that what I looked at is that he also lied 28 times. The way the debate ran, not my fault, no one else's fault.
But it seemed like you were having.
And there's George jumping in to save him. Instead of saying, "Sir, you're all over the map here. I asked you a simple question. Could you give me the answer?" Instead, he jumps in to save him. And what's happening is Joe Biden is trying to remember all of the coaching he got before this interview. And he's just going to just verbal vomit all of it out. Lied 28 times. By the way, at no point did George Stephanopoulos say, "Could you give me one example of one of the lies that he told?" Which of Donald Trump's 28 lies really bothered you the most? He can't answer that. All right, let's move on. Because he said he had one bad night. It was just one bad night, everybody. It was just one bad night, but it's not going to happen again. Everything's fine. Well, it was revealed over the weekend that the president's advance team delivers to him cue cards, not just about what to say and who's in the room at any given event and reminders of what the schedule and agenda might be. No. They have to take pictures of the door he's supposed to walk in on. And look at the stage right here. It's at the note is walk to podium. I don't know, maybe it's me. But if I'm about to go on stage and there's a podium there, my instinct is that that's where I'm supposed to go. Or you know what else I could do? Right before I'm introduced, I could turn to the guy on and say, "Where do you want me to go? The podium? Okay, I got it, the podium." But no. This White House has to take a picture and in big, bold letters say, "Walk to podium." But he's fine, guys. He just had one bad night. Why are you getting so exercised about this? It was one bad night. And, the interview with George Stephanopoulos, it was just one bad interview. The Biden administration did point to some other interviews that he had, notably radio interviews in Philadelphia. Sure, the Stephanopoulos thing didn't go well and the debate didn't go well, but look at these great interviews he had in Philadelphia. Well, CNN had the two radio hosts from Philadelphia on to talk about those really stellar interviews that are being held up by the White House and the campaign as examples as to why Joe Biden is just fine. In fact, he's sharp as a tack. He's the most brilliant politician and leader that we've ever had the privilege of being around. So CNN wanted to know from those two radio hosts about those interviews. And, well, we learned something.
You each you asked 4 questions, and maybe that's what you were allowed to ask by the campaign or the White House. But they were essentially the same questions, both interviews, about accomplishments, progress in your respective state, what's at stake in the election, what he has to say about his debate performance, and what he would say to voters who think their vote doesn't matter or might sit this election out. Were those questions given to you by the White House, or the campaign, or did you have to submit questions ahead of this interview?
The questions were sent to me for approval. I approved them.
Okay, so the White House sent the questions to you ahead of the interview.
Yes.
Okay.
I got several questions, 8 of them, and the 4 that were chosen were the ones that I approved.
Okay. And the reason I ask is not a criticism of either view. It's just that if the White House is trying now to prove the vim, vigor, acuity of the president, I don't know how they do that by sending questions first before the interview so that the president knows what's coming.
The interviews were scripted. And by the way, good on that CNN host. They looked at both of the interviews and said, well, this is weird. They're asking the same questions. What are the odds that 2 hosts on 2 different radio stations would ask the same questions? And the odds are, well, 0 to none. They were scripted. And this radio host, I feel bad for her because she thinks she did something. She seems proud. Well, I approved the questions. Wait, that's not how this works, ma'am. I can tell you, I'm a radio host too, and I hate seeing another radio host get into trouble. It's just weird because our business can't afford. It's hard enough, let's just say. But she got herself into trouble by being a hack for Joe Biden and trusting the campaign and trusting the White House. I've interviewed President Trump multiple times during the campaign in 2016, while he was president, and post-presidency. Never, not once, ever, 0 times have I ever been told what questions to ask. Certainly not scripted questions. I can tell you the one thing that, and this is true with a lot of politicians when they're coming on specifically to promote an agenda, the one time that the White House under President Trump would ever give any guidance, as they say, to the radio interviewer, that would be me, they would say, listen, I know you want to ask a lot of questions. If you can make the first question or 2 about the tax cut, we would appreciate it. That's it. And by the way, you don't have to. That's her mistake. You don't have to do what they tell you to do. Right? You can say, yeah, sure, that's exactly what I'll do. And then you do your thing, right? But sure, you make it go, but you get to write the question. You get to ask the question you want to ask about the tax cut. So I'm told that Donald Trump is the fascist. He's the totalitarian. He's anti-First Amendment. He's anti-free press. And also I'm told that he's brain-addled, that he doesn't have it all together, that he's got cognitive decline. And yet, strangely, this would be a perfect time for people to come out and say, you know, the Trump White House scripted questions for us too, but no one's ever done that. Meanwhile, you've got journalists faking outrage that this happened with this radio host. Please, we've seen this. This has been going on for the entire presidency. Biden accidentally showed his cue card that had the question and answer from an LA Times journalist on it. All of this stuff is pre-scripted. You know how I know for sure that this happens all the time? Because Karine Jean-Pierre promised me it didn't.
And you are going to see him, continue to see him, having interviews. He's going to do ABC, as you know, with George Stephanopoulos, one of your colleagues. That's not scripted. And he has done more than 40 interviews that have not been scripted. Interviews do not have a script this year alone. So you'll see him out there engaging with the American people.
So she just said that he's going to be doing all these interviews and they're not scripted. And yet this interview was literally scripted. And it was a radio interview, by the way. So not only was the question scripted for the interviewer and the host, but the answer was also scripted because it's radio. He can read whatever they hand in front of him. And ironically, he screwed that up too. One last thing here, by the way, sad story. That radio host, that woman that you just saw from Philadelphia, her name is, wait for it. I feel bad, so I want to get her name right. Andrea Lawful Sanders, WURD. It's a Black-owned radio station in Philadelphia, talk station, WURD. Word. Get it? Yeah, Andrea Lawful Sanders tendered her resignation yesterday. But she didn't really resign. She was fired by the radio station because she violated their policies with regard to an interview. You're not supposed to do that. In fact, I want you to listen to I want to read for you a part of the statement that the radio station put out because it's actually very good. The radio station said, and I quote, This practice of delegitimizing Black voices continues today. WURD radio is not a mouthpiece for the Biden or any other administration. Internally, we will commit to reviewing our policies, procedures, and practices to reinforce WURD's independence and trust with our listeners. But mainstream media should do its own introspection to explore how they have lost the trust of so many Americans, Black Americans chief among them. Good for them. And I feel sorry for any radio host who gets fired there, but for the grace of God go I, but not really, because I would never do that. And anyone with any integrity would never do that. Even if you're rooting for the politician that you're interviewing, you can't do that. It's malpractice. And WRD is 100% right to call out the rest of mainstream media because they have been bending over frontwards and backwards to help this guy out because they hate Donald Trump. And they hate you for supporting and voting for Donald Trump. And they're not really the press anymore or the media anymore. It's funny how you're not hearing a whole lot of journalists screaming with outrage, not at the radio host, but at the campaign and at the White House for even trying to do this and succeeding. Do you want to know why you're not seeing a lot of reporters outraged about this? Why the White House Correspondents Association hasn't said anything? Have any other journalists all over television haven't been saying much? Because they've done it too. That's why. Oh, and one other thing. There's a reason why this was a Black station that Joe Biden did this, because he assumed that they would roll over and do this for him. He assumed, he takes for granted the Black vote at every possible opportunity. Let's see how that works out for him this November.